to you all. Welcome to this webinar. And I know many of us are just signing on from many different parts of Asia, the Pacific, as well as the Middle East. Welcome to you all. Welcome. Welcome, friends. Welcome all. My name is Reverend Kathy Chang. I'm here from the Philippines, and I'm a volunteer with the Secretariat of Churches Witnessing with Migrants. I welcome you to this webinar that is co-sponsored by the Churches Witnessing with Migrants and the Inform Network. I welcome you all from all four corners of the Middle East and the Asia and Pacific. Salam alaikum. Namaste, good day to us all. To help us through today's webinar, I'd like to share an overview of our segments in our time together. We'll be starting with some introductions and some orientations of Churches Witnessing with Migrants and the Inform Network, followed by some very timely video presentations. In addition to that, we'll actually have some input from live presentations from resource persons, followed up by faith responses coming from different faith communities. Throughout this webinar, as participants, you will be able to join in live discussions through the Q&A, and we'll be able to share those questions and answers at the latter part of this webinar. By way of friendly reminders, please stay muted as we are now recording. We'll be able to make most of this recording without any distractions. And for those of you who are on Zoom or Facebook Live, especially, these are two other places that you'll be able to find a way to share your questions. Again, through the Zoom Q&A or through the Facebook Live on the Inform page. You can share your questions there. And one important note of translation. Most and almost all of our webinar will be in English. However, as we hear from an imam who will be speaking in Bahasa, Indonesian, we will have the chance to receive simultaneous translation. On the very bottom, far right, you will see interpretation. Unfortunately, Bahasa is not a channel that is available, so be sure to click on the Japanese channel and you'll be able to receive the full translation. I will remind you again of that before we go into this segment. Welcome all once again. And let's get started. Let's learn a little bit more and hear from the Inform Network through this video.
Warm greetings of solidarity. My name is Reverend Joram Kalimutan, and I am a program coordinator of the AMIDST. We in the Asia Pacific Mission for Migrants work for and with migrants. As a regional migrant center, we support the empowerment of migrants and their movement building through advocacy, education, and organizing. In the work we do, we build and nurture partnerships with ecumenical and faith-based groups who can become friends of migrants, supporters of their causes, and advocates for them. It is for this reason that the APMM formed the Faith Partnership and Solidarity Program. In 2010, we gathered leaders of faith communities of Christians, Buddhists, Muslim and Hindus to the interfaith dialogue on children, family, and migration. This meeting paved the way to the formation of the Interfaith Network for the Rights of Migrants, or INFORM. INFORM is a loose network of faith communities actively supporting grassroots migrants through service provision, advocacy, campaign, and lobbying. It has helped build cooperation between faith communities and grassroots migrants organizations through consultations, sharing among INFORM members, interfaith dialogues, regional conferences that tackle the issues of migrants in jail, labor trafficking, and call for decent work. This year, we hope to further strengthen the faith partnership and solidarity with migrants through the following. Number 1, Faith Migrant Solidarity Conference on Service Provision for Migrants and their families. Here, we will discuss the current geography of present services for migrants in the region, the challenges migrant service providers face, and the ways forward for cooperation. We aim to develop a system of referral among service providers and migrant groups within Asia-Pacific and Middle East, which will include updating a director of service providers, faith groups with migrants desks, and advocates that the APMN has released before. Number 2, recognizing the role of faith communities in advancing migrant human rights, we hope to bring them in regional dialogue on the global compact on safe, orderly, and regular migration. Through this dialogue, various faith leaders will be invited to share their perspective on the current trend of international migration, the human rights situation of migrants, and how they can help build an architecture of solidarity and support to them with the use of the GCM. Number 3, we also wish to contribute to generating awareness on the situation of migrants and initiatives, campaigns, and best practices of our partners and other groups in championing migrant rights. We hope to publish them in a monthly bulletin. We invite you to become part of these initiatives. By supporting our activities for this year, we can strengthen the bridge that links the communities of faith, of service providers and advocates, and of migrants. Let us work together in restoring the rights and dignity of migrants and their families. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Reverend Joram Kalimutan, for that introduction from the INFORM network. We'll also hear from the second co-host of today's webinar through the Secretariat and Mervin Toquero. Here's a video greeting from him.
Magandang araw po sa ating lahat. On behalf of the Secretariat of the Churches Witnessing with Migrants, or CWWM, thank you for joining us in this webinar called Faith Communities Working with Migrants Amidst the Pandemic Crisis. For those of you who are not familiar with CWWM, we are a tripartite network of grassroots migrants, migrant-serving institutions, and faith communities. We are an international platform with regional networks like INFORM here in Asia Pacific and CWWM Africa. And we hope other global regions will also have similar formations in the future as well. Started in 2008 by the National Council of Churches in the Philippines and Migrante International, CWWM is a network that advocates for a critical counter-narrative against the mantra that migration is a tool for development. We are also strengthening an infrastructure of care, an architecture of protection for migrants among our network members all over the world. The COVID-19 pandemic has fully exposed the vulnerabilities of migrants all over the world and the hollowness of the neoliberal paradigm that migration is a tool for development. In these unsettling times, we have seen how churches and faith communities have worked together for the care and protection of migrants with and in solidarity with migrants and other organizations. Our distinguished speakers will further enlighten us on this. Again, welcome everyone. Let us strengthen our solidarity as we all face the challenges of this pandemic. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, friends, Reverend Joram and Mervyn, for those greetings and those introductions to our co-hosts for this webinar. As a reminder for those who may have just joined, as you are learning and further strengthening the network of migrants and their organizations here in Asia, Pacific, and the Middle East, you are encouraged to share your questions that we might be able to answer some of them in the latter part of this webinar. Let's now turn to a few more videos that we might learn a little bit more firsthand of how the COVID-19 crisis is impacting, especially the Philippine context. This is a video that faith communities and Migrante International and Migrante Philippines has created together.
Ngayong panahon ng pandemya, kasama ang mga migranteng Pilipino sa mga pinakamatinding tinamaan ng krisis. Isa sa bawat 4 na Pilipinong namamatay sa COVID-19 ay OFW. Marami sa kanila ay frontliners, mga nurse at iba pang healthcare workers. Sa tala ng Department of Foreign Affairs noong May 25, umabot na sa 2,617 OFW sa abroad ang nagpositibo sa COVID-19. At 328 dito, binawian na ng buhay. Pinakamalaking bilang ng kaso at casualty ay sa Europa at Amerika. Maliban sa epekto sa kalusugan, matindi ang hagupit ng pandemya sa kabuhayan ng mga OFW. Tinatayang aabot sa 420,000 ang maaaring mawalan ng trabaho at umuwi sa Pilipinas, at milyon-milyon naman ang babagsak ang kita dahil sa pagsasara o pagpapaliit ng operasyon ng mga negosyo at industriya sa buong mundo. Ayon sa datos ng DFA noong May 8, umabot na sa 26,130 ang umuwing Pilipino mula sa iba't ibang bahagi ng mundo dahil sa pandemya. Mahigit 7,000 ang land-based at 18,000 naman ang sea-based. Hindi pa dito kabilang ang mahigit 20 cruise ship sa Manila Bay na may lulang mahigit 5,000 na mga marino. Sila ngayon ay stranded sa mga quarantine facilities dahil sa bagal ng proseso ng swab testing, paglalabas ng resulta at pagpapauwi sa mga probinsya. Aligagana ang mga OFW, lalo pat 465 na ang nagpositibo sa mga naka-quarantine. Maliban sa returned OFWs, stranded din ng libu-libong outbound OFWs. Mga naghihintay ng deployment o nag-aayos ng mga papeles na naipit sa Maynila at karatig ng mga probinsya dahil sa enhanced community quarantine. Nagsisiksikan sila sa mga temporary accommodations at pinoproblema ang ilang buwang walang kabuhayan. Halos walang ayuda na binibigay ang gobyerno sa kanila. Sa tuloy-tuloy na extension ng ECQ, walang katiyakan kung kailan sila makakauwi ng probinsya. o kung matutuloy pa ba ang kanilang pag-abroad. Bilang tugon sa hamong kinakaharap ng stranded OFWs, isinulong ng Migrante Philippines at Citizens Urgent Response to End COVID-19 o Cure COVID ang Damayang Migrante. Layunin nitong abutin ang mga stranded para, una, magbigay ng kaalamang pangkalusugan para maiwasan at malabanan ang sakit. Pangalawa, maghatid ng tulong pantawid sa mga basic na pangangailangan tulad ng pagkain at hygiene kits. Pangatlo, buuin ang nagkakaisang tinig at pagkilos ng stranded OFWs at, pang-apat, suportahan ang kanilang laban para sa kalusugan, kabuhayan at karapatan. Simula nang i-launch ang Damayang Migrante noong April 24, nakapaglunsad na ito ng 6 na relief missions at field consultations sa stranded OFWs at sa mga komunidad ng OFW families. Sa kasalukuyan, nakapag-abot na tayo ng food supplies, hygiene kits, health supplements at communication gadgets sa mahigit 2,000 OFWs, kasama ang mga buntis at babies. Naabot na ng Damayang Migrante ang mahigit 25 na iba't ibang quarantine facilities at temporary accommodations. Sa paglibot at pagkonsulta ng Damayang Migrante sa mga OFW sa iba't ibang akomodasyon at pasilidad sa Metro Manila, nabuo ang #StrandedPH, isang online community ng stranded OFWs. Sa diwa ng bayanihan ay ipinananawagan ng mga kabahagi ng #StrandedPH ang karapatan at kagalingan ng ating mga bagong bayani, mula sa pangangalap at paghahatid ng ayuda sa mga stranded na OFW, pagpapalaganap ng impormasyong pangkalusugan tungkol sa COVID-19, hanggang sa paglapit at pangangalampag sa mga ahensya ng gobyerno, hanggang sa pagharap sa Kongreso bilang representante at boses ng OFWs na nananawagan sa gobyerno ng agarang aksyon para tugunan ang samut-saring problema ng OFWs. Inaasahan na libo-libo pang OFW sa mag-uuwian sa darating ng mga linggo at buwan. Uuwi sila na bit-bit ang maraming pangamba at haharapin ang pangkalusugan at pang-ekonomiyang pagsubok. Kaya sa ating mga kababayan, magtulungan po tayo. Nandito kami, ang Damayang Migrante at #StrandedPH para maging kaagapin. Magkaisa po tayo. Sama-sama nating harapin at ipaglaban ang ating kalusugan, kabuhayan at karapatan.
Thank you very much, Damayang Migrante, for that video that gives us insight into the plight of not only land-based, but also sea-based overseas Filipino workers. Now, while support and services and solidarity can come in one form, we begin to learn that even this week, 2 days ago, we commemorated the International Day of Migrant Workers. And as a global campaign, we've also launched a video that's prepared by the International Migrants Alliance. For this video, we'll be able to learn more. Friends, this international launch and this global campaign of the International Migrants Alliance gives us a flavor of the international solidarity that we must use in our favor as we continue to advocate for the rights of migrants. Now is a segment where we've featured videos, but probably you're looking for live presentations now at this point. And so we'll be turning more to hear more from the International Migrants Alliance. I'd like to introduce to you our first resource person, Ms. Annie Lestari. Annie, welcome, and thank you again for being with us. And friends, as you have questions perhaps about the videos or even about Ms. Annie's presentation, again, I encourage you to use the Q&A box to add your questions there. Welcome, Annie.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, friends. I have a PowerPoint to guide us through the discussion. Let me just share it with you. So I thanks the Inform and also CWWM for giving us this opportunity to share the plight of the migrants, immigrant, refugee, regardless of our sector during the COVID-19. I think the video both from IMA and Migrante International has given us a glimpse how is the situation of our constituency during this pandemic. But I would like to emphasize some of the major issues that we are really facing on the ground. So before I talk about the impact during COVID-19, we in IMA actually say that COVID-19 is just another crisis we have been facing. In the past, we get used to the crisis already, from global crisis to Asian financial crisis. It is another type of crisis that migrants, refugee community have been facing in the past years, even decades. So just to give you the number of our migration today, as what the UN said, there is currently 258 million migrants. And out of this number, 164 million are migrant workers. So when we say migrant workers, it is people who fall into the temporary type of employment, domestic worker, construction, plantation, and so forth. So you can say the remaining number are those who are migrating in the permanent base or those who are becoming undocumented in the process. And then on top of that, there is also 65 million people who are being displaced from their home to other countries. So including the 21 million who is holding the refugee status. So you can say that the number of people who are being displaced is actually bigger without status. So we call them stateless refugees. And so basically the type of job what we perform in other countries are what we call it 3D type of jobs. So this dirty, difficult, and dangerous. So we know this story that migrants, whenever we go, we do not become expat, and there are very few elements in this society that migrate in the voluntary basis, those who are in the CEO status or management or maybe student, but 100 millions of us are actually falling into the category of forced migrants. So going back to the history of the impact of the global crisis 2008 to migrants. So as I already said, I became a migrant worker when Asian financial crisis hit Asia. So Indonesia, where I come from, was really hit hard. Unemployment was very huge that time. People were left by the company without any pay. People who just newly graduate cannot even find a job. It was very chaotic situation. It was only in Asia. So, but because of that, there is a push factor where million of young men and women from Asia are forced to migrate within Asia and other region. So you can say that the Asian financial crisis was becoming one of the push factor of increasing the number of migrants. Now in 2008, there is this global financial crisis that became another crisis that pushed migration into a bigger number. So even the United Nations has been calling for governments to find a way how to decrease the number of unemployment back home, giving them as a decent job, decent pay. But in reality, every decade we see the increase of the numbers, but because what we have today is an economy that has been built on top of the profit for the corporates. We do not have an economy that actually serves the needs of the people. So if we ask back, how can be our government create a job when our economy is really meant to serve the interests of the profit of the foreign corporates? That's why you see even there are a lot of unemployment issues, social unrest, people are in hunger. We see the government don't do anything much. What they do, continue doing a lot of development projects, in the name of development, of course, and globalization. But in practice, is they are displacing people, they are increasing prices, they are taking away people land and livelihood. So there we are. The migrants, refugee are actually the consequences of all those kind of action. So the global financial crisis, as what Asian financial crisis, also has an effect, not only pushing people to move abroad or to work abroad, but even people who are already abroad are also suffering from this different type of condition. One is our condition become worse, we became overworked, the wages become decreased, of course there is an increase in the wages, but when you purchase it, when you buy it, you cannot get much. And also our rights is getting less and less, including a citizen right or even a visa. Those who usually stay for 2 years now suddenly become 1 year or 6 months. And then immigration become very strict, the border control become very strict. Now a lot of government, European Union, Australian government is paying. For example, in European Union, they are paying Turkish government to be police at the border to stop refugee from taking the boat. That's one of the example. In Asia, for example, Australian government is paying Indonesian government to be the controller at the border. So all these refugees who are stranded currently in Indonesia will not be able to take a boat to Australia. So you can see it is not only immigration, but also mobilizing other countries to be the safeguard of the most advanced countries in the world. And also increase of the number of undocumented, more people are so desperate to stay abroad, and there are more violence and brutality by authority, trafficker, even employers, and the increase of the human trafficking cases. So I just want to reiterate, a lot of people are asking how we can change the government, the government where we are working, and even our own government, to be more humanitarian, to be more human science, to do more of their obligation to their people. Because as if for years that we have been doing advocacy, seems they do not want to listen to us. Of course, in front of us, they keep saying, yes, we will do our part. Yes, we will fulfill our obligation. But in reality, after the meeting, after the negotiation, after the dialogue, there is really nothing happening. So it's really because when we go deeper into the meaning, what are the migrants for sending countries, for our own countries? Why they don't even bother to see number of people who are died abroad and being sent back home? Why they don't bother to see their people are being physically tortured abroad and physically abused by their employees abroad? And why they are not even bothered when their people are being trafficked and even died on the sea? So this kind of question really bother us as a migrants ourselves, but also as a fighter of migrants. So then we come to realize that because of this kind of globalization economic system, for our own government, the people, including us, for them is just a commodity or cheap labor, anything to enrich the rich. This is our, our status for them. So when they see migrants, it is not human they are seeing. It is a commodity to be exported. It is where the money will be coming to the countries. It is where the corrupt official will earn their corrupt money. So that's why we have been facing a lot of challenge of even telling our own government to do more for their own people. Even education has been redesigned to serve the needs of the global corporate. So in the case of Philippines, for example, in Asia, even in the world, Philippines is really super model, creating super maid, super doctors, super nurses, simply because it's telling to the world the people in the Philippines are cheap and poor, so you can exploit them as much as you wish. So that's why asking accountability from our government to the point of almost impossible. And also, what are we for the receiving government? We've been doing a lot of advocacy, but for them, we are just a source of cheap labor. So now I will go directly to the impact of the COVID-19 to the health of migrants. So again, this is more on synthesis of what IMA has been able to gather. This is not only applicable to to Asia, but everywhere in the world. The story of migrants during COVID-19 is the same everywhere. So one is about infection and death. Again, migrants are really as service workers. We are in the frontliners. We work in the health industry, domestic worker, caregiver, entertainment, and name it, you know. So we are the frontliner. Even when the government say lockdown and social distancing, we continue to work. Many of us died in the process, and almost none of them get any compensation from any government. And many of them who also died are, like in the case of Singapore, they live in the very dense and cramped dormitories or labor camps, and company do not really mind that they do not have sufficient health facilities or accommodation. So many of them who are infected because they live in the very super dense areas or camp. And then the next impact that we face is denial of protection tool. Most migrants in Asia are not given any mask and sanitizer. Many of us are forced to buy with our own salary. So that actually creates another type of financial stress, because now out of our expectation, we have to spend 10 to 20% of our income to buy mask, sanitizer, and healthy food. And psychological stress, because a lot of overwork. In fact, in Asia, where the majority sector is domestic worker, the government has been telling employers and domestic workers to prohibit us from going out during holiday. And that creates stress, because for 2 or 3 months, we cannot go out at all in the name of social distancing. And then also lack of health services. There are some COVID-19 testing, but you cannot get it until you pay. And some government, in the case of Malaysia, will use free testing to arrest undocumented migrants. And another biggest aspect is really lack of information, all in English or in Chinese. People don't understand what they are talking about. So we are the one who has to translate and print and give away. And then the next social impact that we are facing now and later is the loss of livelihood. The ILO already project, one more minute, ILO project, there will be 125 million job loss in Asia Pacific, targeting low-paid and low-skilled employment that will include migrants. There are 7 sectors that will be retrenched. At least many of them will really close down: garment, restaurant, transportation, hotel and tourism, construction, trading, and manufacture. And most of the migrants work in those areas. And termination and deportation has been very common now from US to Europe to Asia. Unpaid leaves, many of them are also forced to take unpaid leave because the company or the employer do not want to take responsibility. And then a lot of government from US and Australia already saying they will not process any visa application now. And our rights has been cut down, and we are also not given any relief program. Many governments are giving money to their people, but not to the migrants and refugee. Crackdown, arrest, and deportation become very, very open now, and shrinking of democratic spaces. In fact, now with the militarization, not only in the Philippines or Indonesia or other countries, even in countries like Hong Kong, the militarization is in the form of social distancing policy. So the last thing is what we have done in the past months as a grassroots organization. We actually try to address the immediate needs of migrant and refugee. One is really about giving away information. We translate, we print out without any funding. We also give gather relief from mass food, sanitizer, we give away to fellow migrants and refugees. We are also advocating for our rights. At least we provide legal assistance and safe repatriation. But the question that everyone is looking forward is, how is our life post COVID-19? It is really a big question. Many people are so afraid. Now there is already prediction 20% of our remittances will be turning lower. That means our family do not get enough money during this COVID-19. Yet they are also being heavily affected by the COVID-19. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Annie, for that really insightful but also historical overview that brings us even to our current day challenges with the COVID-19. And I know that you had many things to say, and perhaps even during our question and answer session, we'll be able to pick up on many of the themes that you have brought up in your present. Dr. Liberato Batista, to us, many of us known as Levy. Levy is serving now as the president of the Conference of Non-Governmental Organizations in Consultative Relationship with the United Nations, Congo for short. In his presentation, Levy will help us to understand how the CWWM, Churches Witnessing with Migrants, international consultation in Ecuador, relates to our work today and especially relates to the International Labor Organization Convention 189. Levy, take it away.
Let me just a few minutes to how does that work? Okay, can you hear me? All right, thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you for having me in this webinar. I'm joining you from New Jersey. I have not been to my office in New York since March 10. So I've been on lockdown here at home and through the facility of a webinar like this, I'm so pleased to be able to join you. I am glad to be on the same platform with many people at APMM, Inform, Migrante International, and IMA, and I'm so glad that they have provided already the necessary information that would make our conversation today substantive as well as informative. I have two photos that describes my feeling today. These are two flowers in bloom in our garden here in New Jersey. It's a bleeding heart. My heart bleeds for the situation in which we are, the multi-layered pandemics of not just COVID-19, but the pandemic of racism and of global hunger and so many others. But my heart is also inflamed. My heart is bursting with joy with the robust engagement of peoples, of migrants and refugees in taking care of their lives and their destinies and no longer allowing us and others to define their lives. Their voices are primordial to the solutions we're looking for in their lives. My assignment is threefold. Mervyn has already done a great job in introducing to you CWWM, but I'll try to look at the 10th annual consultation in relation to the rest of the framework that Churches Witnessing with Migrants, of which I have been associated since Mexico in 2009. So we meet today under conditions of multi-layered pandemics of COVID-19, racism, and hunger, to say a few of those. And they are all each ravaging our peoples and the planet in their own way, and simultaneously as well, pillaging people's lives and livelihoods, subverting the integrity of their biological bodies. Certainly, that's how COVID-19 is lethal, but also subverting our own moral agency and our capacity as economic and political beings to control our lives and destinies. So under conditions of lockdown and shelter in place, the political tools of organizing and mobilizing have been severely restrained. And I'm sure the constituency of CWWM and IMA and Migrante and Inform are raring to go to the streets. But with COVID still very much around, that those kinds of mobilizing have to be taken with a lot of caution. I suggest to you that the work and witness of the international group called CWWM attempts to demonstrate how an equal tripartite partnership of migrants and refugees, migrant and refugee serving institutions, and faith and religious bodies working collaboratively models for us a radical koinonia of equals. I haven't used that term before. I have used it just very recently in an article I was asked to write for the World Council of Churches. A radical koinonia of equals and a contextual and prophetic diaconia in which the platform that puts the tripartite parties in a common setting of work allows for the transformation of social relations among involved persons, as well as the transformation of the substance of their ministries and undertakings. This to me is a far more radical understanding of the oikomene, of the ecumenical community. And Quito, the 10th consultation of CWWM, added even a more substantive framing of that radical koinonia and prophetic diaconia by creating a working group on interfaith engagement for migrant justice. So the oikomene is far larger than the faith expressions, than the communions that include it, because the oikomene is more than just the Christian community that the ecumenical community already brings up to its ken, if you will. I would be happy to share the slide with you so that I don't have to elaborate too much on some of the slides, but simply to say that from Manila in 2008 to Quito in 2010, in 2019 last year, the progression of the self-understanding, of the raison d'etre, of the work of CWWM has always, as you see in Athens, for example, asserted that CWWM's reason for being is for the care, empowerment, and upholding of the human rights of migrants and refugees. And so it has, over the years, for 10 years, it has tried to grapple with the fact that that is not the case in national legislations. That is not the case in the production of international regimes at multilateral institutions like the United Nations. And therefore, CWWM's role is at once a radical proposition of the original gospel message, if you will, from a Christian perspective, of the inherent dignity that is equally shared by migrants and refugees as all other people. And that's a basic assertion of CWWM, as you can see in the New York meeting in 2013. So that then in 2014 in Stockholm, it says solidarity and advocacy is a radical notion of hospitality, that when we work with migrants and refugees and articulate a notion of neighborliness, we are each a neighbor to the other. They are not just our neighbors wanting to be the object of our ministries of compassion. They are, in fact, a voice on their own, able to articulate what they want and what they need. So when we move forward, fast forward to Quito, Quito then defined and gave examples of what an infrastructure of hospitality, of care, of what we initially called in Stockholm, acts of mercy, and an architecture of solidarity, an architecture of the protections that we give to the fundamental care needed. And therefore, the launching of the 3 working groups dealing with interfaith engagement for migration justice, a resolve to continue engaging multilateral institutions like the United Nations, but this time, a resolve as well to identify, the term used is map, is mapping of the infrastructures of care and of the architecture of protection. Just to be to put it simply, the infrastructure of care are the things that many of the faith institutions, religious organizations already do. Feeding, care, health care, counseling for those who have experienced trauma, etc. And the architecture of protection has to do with the production and development of legislation and public policy that safeguards and protects the human rights of migrants and refugees. So the religious and faith bodies, and I can see, and that's where I can see in my screen Imam Mazuki. I see we also have Bishop Benner from Germany joining us. They have all participated in Quito in the formulation of how religious and faith bodies can no longer just accompany, but be a constitutive part of this tripartite formation called the CWWM. I'll leave that. The CWWM talking and doing points make very clear that human dignity and all human rights are equally the dignity and human rights that migrants, refugees, and uprooted peoples inherently bear in them. And that, as you see in the 6th part, nothing about migrants without migrants in any venue and level of negotiation. So by the time we got to Quito, there were narratives and voices of migrants that became the primary text rather than the reference. And that, to me, is crucial to the work of CWWM. What is unique with CWWM is that the voice of the migrant is the primary voice through which we are able to elaborate the love and compassion of God exuding among them, and that they are vehicles of their own and our own and of their own liberation, and that our own liberation is tied to the liberation of all of God's peoples. So that today, as we highlight as well the Convention 189 of ILO, and we include in our understanding of that group of underclass of domestic workers who are who in the international arena still lack the necessary international laws to protect them, and therefore the call for the ratification of the convention is very urgent. It's only been ratified by 8 countries, and of those 8 countries, just like the convention on the rights of migrant workers and their families, you don't see, except here, there's one migrant receiving country, Italy, that has already ratified it. As I said, the global pandemics has upended many of our organizing and our mobilizing work, but but it unraveled for us the necessity and the continuation of what IMA and APMM and Migrante and Inform have been doing. The global pandemics has shown us that global poverty, global hunger, global warming are all interrelated with the coronavirus, and therefore it calls on us to continue trans-border organizing. The virus is trans-border, and therefore the organizing that is needed for must also be trans-border. So the CWWM is known for its analysis of the situation, in which it pulls in historic and systemic injustices as being entangled in all of the advocacies that in all of the issues that we've been raising, and that these historic and systemic injustices of slavery, colonialism, and racism, issues that have become primary texts that we see on newspapers and hear about in televisions today, make for a good case and an urgent case for the advocacy for the human rights of migrants and refugees, because they are in fact the best expression of the exploitation and oppression that a global system of unequal economic relations have spawned. It is interesting, well, it is more than interesting, I should actually say, that the very public health instructions under COVID-19 that we must do, which is stay at home, wash our hands, stay in place, practice physical distancing, are the very things that are denied migrant workers, domestic workers, and refugees. How can they stay at home when they don't have homes in the process of human mobility? How can they wash their hands when the very little water, if at all, must be for drinking and not for washing hands? And so how can they practice physical distancing when domestic workers don't even have a space in the places of abode of their employers? And so we must not only think twice, but think so much more in the narrativization of both what is needed and what is in fact lacking in the lives of migrants and refugees. So, and of course, these prescriptions are themselves breeding grounds for the kind of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and intolerance that migrants and refugees have experienced, not just in places of transit and destination, but already even in their own countries of origin. And so that's why the export of labor in itself is part of that framework of discrimination and oppression that migrants and refugees from the get-go, if you will, already experience. So what the pandemic on racism has brought to the fore is that even prior to COVID-19, the pandemic of racism has already been there, and it's part of that pandemic of colonialism, and so the historic injustices can be included in what the World Health Organization has listed in the social determinants of health. That if people are denied of employment, if people are denied of good health services, if people are denied of education, when other things happen, including threats to their health, they also turn to be threats to lives and livelihoods. And that is what both COVID-19 as well as racism are putting up front in our vista, if you will, today, and they cannot be ignored anymore. So I'll skip some of my slides. Simply, this is a statement lifted from a perspective offered by the World Council of Churches, the Lutheran World Federation, and the Council on World Mission, where it basically speaks of a world in which profit-making, socioeconomic inequalities, political self-interest, and historic legacies of that I have spoken about are of concern. And therefore, when we are called to go back to work, when we go back to a new normal, what is required of us is to not anymore accept the current rules of labor. What we need to assert is that we will go back to work only under new labor rules, not the rules of the market that have prioritized greed and profit over the health, well-being of peoples, but especially migrants and refugees. So,
Reverend Levy, this is actually a good place for us to think about and really reflect on all that you have provided for us, have given us much food for thought, not only in terms of the history of CWWM, but where we might be headed as well. Friends, in the true collaborative effort of what we do together, I will be turning over my co-moderator responsibilities to another colleague. My internet connection is unstable, and so I will be able to turn over to Ray. But in the meantime, I wanted to thank again Pastor Levy for his presentation, as well as Annie. And in our next segment, we'll be able to hear responses directly from the faith communities. Ray, as a co-moderator, are you able to take over from here now?
Hello, yes. Thank you, Kathy. Hello, everybody. My name is Ray Assis, and I'm from the Asia Pacific Mission for Migrants. I'm the program coordinator for advocacy and engagement of the APMM. So we are on the third segment of the webinar, in which here we will have our faith communities providing responses to us with regard to with regard to how they are responding to the needs of migrants and refugees in their respective areas. And we have with us our two speakers. We're providing special emphasis on Australia as a receiving country and Indonesia as a sending country. For our first respondent from the faith community, with us is Ms. Liz Stone, who is the General Secretary of the National Council of Churches in Australia. So I will be asking Liz a few questions. So for Liz, the questions we would like to ask you are, what are the current programs of NCCA that responds to the situation of migrants and refugees in the midst of COVID crisis? Are there any gaps in terms of government policies that respond to the situation of migrants and refugees in the midst of COVID crisis? And three, what are the challenges faced by the faith communities or NCCA in particular in responding to the crisis? Liz?
Thank you very much, Ray. Greetings to you all from Sydney. The National Council of Churches in Australia has a program called the Australian Churches Refugee Task Force. And it is very much involved in engaging with and advocating with the refugees and asylum seekers in Australia and also lobbying about government policies that affect them. The Refugees Task Force was set up in 2013 and has been very active during this COVID-19 pandemic. And I thank you, Eni, and I thank you, Dr. Batista, and those of you who have given the perspective from your point of view, because we have certainly been hearing from our refugees and asylum seekers in Australia and working with them at this time. You may also know the National Council of Churches of Australia's aid agency, Act for Peace, and their work in the Asia Pacific region around protection and working with refugee communities. Through APRRN, the Asia Pacific Refugee Rights Network, there has been a lot of work being done in the last couple of months with Malaysia and Thailand and Indonesia with the boats of Rohingya refugees and the treatment of migrant workers, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka and the Middle East. So you can see that there are a number of programs of the National Council of Churches in Australia that are quite active at this time. I think it's good, Eni, that you challenged us about those countries like Australia who proudly tell us that we've had 25 years of unbroken economic growth. And you have rightly said, all of you, that that has been helped by a migrant workforce, which when the COVID-19 pandemic was clearly on a horizon, and the Australian government put through omnibus legislation in the Australian Parliament, all temporary visa holders were excluded from any support, either emergency relief or income support. Immediately before and immediately after, the churches were activated here in a number of ways. Firstly, every country, as we've been talking about, is as vulnerable as the most vulnerable in our societies when there's a pandemic. Our health system is as good for all of us as it is for the most vulnerable. Our social safety nets are as strong as it is for the most vulnerable. So for the churches in Australia and the faith communities in Australia, there were two groups who were really facing destitution before the shutdown of Australia and the need to support people with government support. And they were asylum seekers waiting for determination on their refugee status. Now, I'm just looking at the official figures here because I want to say that there were 1,100,000 people residing in Australia who were excluded from any form of Australian government support, and still are, I must say, federal government support from March. 216,000 of them were on bridging visas, which means they are waiting for determination of their refugee status and asylum status in Australia. But of course, there is no legal system that's processing or even looking at their status. So that gives it an indefinite stay on any decision. But we actually have to acknowledge that there are a certain number of people on no visa at the moment, the stateless ones you're talking about, and there are approximately 60,000 in Australia at this time. And the other group we're concerned about very much were the 7,000 Pacific seasonal workers in Australia under official migrant worker schemes sponsored by the Department of Foreign Affairs, sponsored by Australian government departments, in association with Pacific governments. All excluded from income support, but more importantly, all excluded from access to our Medicare, which is our national public health system. And this, if it is a public health concern, which we raised immediately with our government in terms of the health of these people in our communities at a very dangerous time. And this is March, when we didn't know where the pandemic, how the pandemic would affect Australia. Another group of concern, maybe a small group, but we know from the Singapore experience, it is a group not to be ignored, were the 1,400 women and men held in immigration detention onshore here in Australia, where they're forced to share rooms, eat in crowded food halls, and are constantly in contact with guards and other staff. We pointed out very early that if physical distancing was mandated for everyone in Australia, why was this group excluded? So you can see we've been busy, and we've had small wins. Our community services, who were already supporting asylum seekers in terms of employment assistance, English language assistance, we ran food banks, we provided other sort of casework, especially legal advice, were immediately compromised at the time of the shutdown in Australia, when physical distancing became mandatory from the end of March. And they were compromised because, of course, the services had to physically distance and had real difficulties reaching out. So again, the most vulnerable were again the most vulnerable in terms of responding to their emergency needs. But I'll quote some statistics for you from two services in Sydney, Western Sydney, where I am. Jesuit Refugee Service experienced a 224% increase in demand in terms of emergency food relief, rental assistance, and assist to pay bills. Had a 110% increase in clients, and 60% of that emergency assistance was for rental arrears and crisis accommodation. Many of these people, thank you, I'm getting a wave. Many of these people were on the verge, are on the verge, and being kept from destitution and homelessness by our services. And just as a final thing to say, in our submission to the Australian Government's Senate Select Committee review of the Australian Government's response to COVID-19, we've been really clear about what we failed to do this time, and we have to ensure is part of creating a social safety net for all in Australia, and for making sure that health and wellbeing is prioritised way before other political priorities that may come about in terms of asylum seekers and refugees on temporary visas. So we've been doing our best. I'd also like to just reply, if you don't mind me taking this moment to say, the Australians were very aware and perhaps educated about the number of migrant workers on cruise ships around the world and in Australia, because that was a source of infection, one of the sources of infection for Australian people. I think that's actually was a bit of a wake-up call, I think, for the Australian people to realise that how sick and abandoned the crew on these ships have been. We had a number offshore in Australia on the east and west coast, which we carefully moved on, but then the media actually followed to see what happened to them. And I think that awareness raising is good for the future. Finally, I'd just say that Australia often looks to Canada and New Zealand and the UK to see how we're going in terms of our policies. Canada and the civil society groups there have come up with hashtag Just Recovery for All and hashtag Build Back Better, with 6 principles for doing better going forward. And I would say we were going to encourage that with our refugee and asylum seeker sector agencies in Australia. And I'd encourage you all to have a look at those 6 principles. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you for providing us with a very comprehensive response. It's good to know that the migrants and the refugees in Australia are not alone in their struggle for inclusion, protection, and services from the Australian government. At this point, we would like to call on Imam Marzuki. But before that, we would like to request all the attendees and participants in the Zoom to switch to the Japanese channel. There will be a simultaneous translation from Bahasa Indonesia to English. But since Zoom does not enlist Bahasa Indonesia as a language, we have that designated the Japanese channel as the channel for that. So may we request everybody, you can see on your lower part of your Zoom the interpretation, and please click Bahasa, the Japanese channel. So for this section, we would like to welcome Imam Marzuki Wahid to respond to the following questions. Imam, these are the questions. Number 1, based on your observations and analysis, has the situation of Indonesian migrants working overseas worsened? What is the current situation of Indonesian migrants repatriated back to Indonesia in the midst of the crisis? And the second question, what are the initiatives or actions of the Muslim communities in responding to the distressed Indonesians, families of migrants, and repatriated migrants? Imam?
Okay. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. I want to try to speak in English, and I have read writing to. I have written the writing to read in this Zoom, and can me to share screen about that. Okay.
Please go ahead.
Okay. Okay. The situation of Indonesian migrants repatriated back to Indonesia in the midst of the pandemic crisis. During the new coronavirus pandemic, COVID-19, Indonesian migrant workers experienced multiple impacts, especially women who become workers in the domestic sector outside of the country. It was a difficult fact that many Indonesian migrant workers experienced various forms of domestic and domestic workers in 19 countries. Women working positions are most vulnerable when they work, whether they take care of or care for them. Increasing compliance with social and quarantine self-isolation restrictions. When Malaysia applied lockdown policy, this makes migrant workers intertwined, so that is it difficult to get help when experiencing violence in the place of work, and also increasing costs, and other basic needs. Based on data from the Ministry of Manpower, Republic of Indonesia, 2019, 44.465 uh, 70% of 64,062 Indonesian migrant workers are women. The majority of them work in the informal sector. Not only that, now there are also many migrant workers who are dismissed, but there is no longer any difference to Indonesia because they are included in close border, such as in Riau, Sumatra. The amount of the rainfall, this result in their being bound on this destination without work, they're tended with hunger and cannot access the basic needs. In addition, deportation of thousands of Indonesian migrant workers who do not have working permits and exceeding the time limit of work in Malaysia makes them increasingly infected with COVID-19 infection, starvation, as well as experiencing hiring and violating other rights. The examples is the incident in Sumbawa Regency, West Nusa Tenggara in Indonesia. There, migrant women workers are detained in shelters of channeling confined with the court facilities for circulations, urgency in active rooms, active drinking waters, no proper masks, no masks, and asking for losses due to significations. This policy cannot prove to stop the vulnerability of migrant workers in ensuring the situation of Indonesian migrants to stop the placement process of Indonesian migrant workers. But it is not as comprehensive possible regulate the steps that must be taken ensure Indonesian migrant workers continue to obtain protection of the country, is said as published by media. The fact is that it violates general principle, non-discrimination, and limit the parties to the work of the workers of the houses migrant regulate in Article 1 of the 1990 Migrant Conventions. Recommendation to the General Conventions on elimination of all forms in discrimination against women, number 26. Based on data from the Solidarity of Women, Indonesia, 30% of women migrant workers are victims of human trafficking until March 2020. The more the placement of non-compliance procedure since the Ministry of Manpower Indonesia number 260 of 2015 applied, accompanied by unpaid labor, detention but serving return document, for courtesy of document, physical violence, even sexual violence to exploitations. The result of the COVID-19 survey of Indonesia migrant workers carried out by the Human Rights Working Group together with Association of Indonesian Migrant Workers and Migrant Workers Network on April 21 and until 60, 2020, 30, sorry. Surveillance was conducted using the survey service by collecting 110 49 respondents were worked in the vicinity of the airport. A number of Indonesian migrant workers has experienced violations of the coronavirus response, starting from termination of employment, unpaid salary, fear of reporting on health condition because of fear of being caught by land security to illegal actions, termination of employment in sensitive high exposure. The majority of Indonesian migrant workers who work in Hong Kong, Singapore, and Taiwan still get mandatory promises, but they have to work on incentive training and feel like they are the result of being left out of the house. Nur Hadirma, for example, a representative of CWWM in Hong Kong, she said, we are exploited. Working hours are edited. Vocation are lost, are forbidden from home. For celebration and restless condition are difficult. A similar problem was experienced by Ari, migrant workers who currently works at the nursing home in Taiwan. He said before it was only 9 people, at least 9 people, but the number of nurses he had to treat was 5 times that. He already said normally one person takes 9 to 12 people, but now there must be up to 50 people. That is very hard for us. Meanwhile, in Singapore, there are a number of Indonesian workers who choose the business of the house to serve results of in exhaustible work, as received by Supriyatin. She said, work is edited because it present work from home. School children from home, many are aware of the blurring, and then salary is cut from $600 to Singapore to $400 Singapore until the economy is normally friendly. And the last my speech, the survey found of the around of 24% of 54% of Indonesian workers, Indonesian migrant workers who work as laborers a Puerto Rican direction, as in Malaysia and Saudi Arabia, mandate get a salary. Meanwhile, 95% of Indonesian American workers in Singapore and Hong Kong, even to working and getting a salary, they get double the burden of workmanship, restriction on mobilizations, vocation depression, and do not get overwork. I think that, but the last speech. The initiative or action the Muslim communities in responding the distressed Indonesians, families, and migrant to repatriated migrant. The Indonesian Muslim community is, of course, very empathic with the condition that have befallen Indonesian migrant workers during the COVID-19 pandemic. Our help from them, of course, in addition to our religious support for them. Most of the Muslim communities, such as Kusturian Network, also participated in the sembako, some basic food for migrant workers in Malaysia and Indonesia when they have come back to homeland. Some other communities provide assistance to migrant workers who have returned to Indonesia. They make training to increase their life capacity, increase economic skills, and accompany their children. and have their living needs in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic. This happened in Indramayu, West Java, and Central Java, and other countries in Indonesia. I think that's my explanation about that. Thank you very much for the good opportunity.
Thank you, Imam Marzuki. Maybe we can already start the sharing. Hold on a second.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay. Hold on a second. Okay. So at this section, at this point, we would like to open the forum for question and answer from the participants. I would like first to read certain comments from our Q&A. This is from Anisul Rahman Khan. He asked, his comment is, being a returnee migrant and migrant community worker, my observation, COVID-19 has affected all human beings, but migrant workers' problems are different from others. For example, they are deprived of being not citizens of their current existing countries, and women migrant workers' sufferings are more. Let us know what faith communities are thinking of them. I'd like to request for special attention to those migrant workers, especially women migrant workers at their destination countries and their families at home countries. We also have received a message from Rosemary Wenner. Her comment is that she has learned a lot and she's very grateful for everything that you are doing, that we are doing. Please be assured of the solidarity of the World Methodist Council. It is good to collaborate with people of other faiths. We are in this together. I personally will continue to be in solidarity with migrants with a bleeding heart and a flaming heart. God bless you all. Rosemary Wenner, Geneva Secretary of the World Methodist Council. We also have, okay, before we read other comments, there is one question here which is addressed to Levy. Now that the voice of migrants has become the text, what strategy does CWWM have in place to hold the national governments where migrant workers originated accountable to represent and advocate the needs of migrant workers vis-a-vis the respective governments of their employers? Levy?
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, anonymous attendee. We don't have the name of who raised the question, but nonetheless, the question is more important than the one. The question, I should say, is an important matter to be addressed. So the voice of migrants as primary text and no longer as footnotes is a commentary on the fact that multilateral institutions prioritize the production of negotiated texts, and the voice and narratives of migrants are on the sidelines, and you rarely would see them quoted as primary voice in the text. And that is what CWWM is doing, that in its meetings, in its annual consultations, and certainly in Quito, the narratives and voices of migrants with respect to their pains and sufferings equally as their hopes and aspirations are primary text rather than footnote. Now, what does that mean? So, such that assertion of the voice must be continually heard and recorded as the primary source for originating ministries and programs of care and compassion. So that is a challenge for migrant-serving institutions, including faith-based and religious organizations, when they originate programs of compassion and care, acts of mercy. They must ensure that it's not only that those ministries should be sensitive to, as if it is making it appear as if it is a second act to get that voice become the primary act for voicing what migrants and refugees need. But also that the voice of the migrant becomes the primary source for the production and development of legislation and public policy that systematizes the protection of migrant rights. Okay, so one of the best ways to do that, well, three ways that Quito, as I said earlier, responded to that need is to make sure that we continue the engagement of CWWM in multilateral platforms, including the United Nations. But what that means is that our best contribution to the multilateral international arena is our own work in the domestic front. So that international law, including the Convention on Domestic Workers, mean nothing until they become part of domestic law. That is why ratification by countries is what is most important. And therefore, CWWM is placed in a strategic position because of the tripartite component. Churches and religious groups are proliferating in the communities around the world. They are very visible and present. And migrant serving institutions, plus the migrants and refugees themselves, they make a potent mix of making sure that countries are accountable for what they say they stand for in international arena. So I think I hope that partly responds to the question.
Thank you, Levy. Before I request our other panelists to share with us, let me just hold on a second. Okay. There are some more comments from our participants. From Bishop Rex Reyes from Paddy Rex. He said, that was quite a walk, Levy. Thank you, resource persons and NCCP CWWM. Given the continuing story of a downward spiral of the situation of migrants, how do we begin saying no to the continuing oppression and vulnerability as we go back to work, quote unquote. From Isabel Freeman, in Germany, COVID-19 raised the public awareness of the huge number of seasonal harvest workers and helpers in the meat processing industries, most of them coming from Eastern Europe, for example, Romania. Several of their dormitories have been hotspots of the infection. And this is from Helen. Hello, Helen. Helen Grace Akwi Wangusa from Kenya. The voice of migrants has become the text in countries and regions where migrant organizing has been structured as an entity. That voice, however, is yet to become the primary text from migrant from Africa in many countries of destination. Africans in the diaspora, for example, are not as organized as Filipinos in the diaspora. This is a component of CWWM that still needs to be built up. Before I request our other panelists to give their 2 cents and responses, I would like just to share with everybody that on June 16, 2 days ago, was the International Day of Domestic Workers, and the International Migrants Alliance organized the first ever global online rally of migrant domestic workers that was attended by 500 migrant domestic workers and their advocates and supporters from all over the world. They highlighted there the issues confronting migrant domestic workers, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. So that video is already available online, which is also on the Facebook page of International Migrants Alliance. At this point, I would like to hear from the other panelists. Maybe we can start with you, Liz.
I just wanted to comment to the comment from Enisu from Bangladesh in the Q&A column. He makes a really important point about, and it goes to the comment I made about we are as vulnerable as the most vulnerable in our societies and communities. Our women-headed households of refugee and asylum seekers with dependents have the most insecure work, partly because, particularly if they've got children, once those children could not go to school and were at home, they were the people most disadvantaged without internet connection and ability to study online. And the comment was these households were, one meal away from, hunger. And there is a current campaign in Australia as part of the No One Left Behind sector campaign called No Child Left Behind. And in fact, we've got schools and education people in Australia advocating to the government that these households are really, of all the groups, really susceptible to suffering at the moment. So I want to say to Anisur, you're right about that. I also want to say that we need to acknowledge the element of domestic and family violence that has happened during this shutdown. We're in crowded households often, and this is something that our community services for refugees and asylum seekers have been really aware of. So I think what you've raised there about what faith communities are thinking about this in terms of women migrant workers, their sufferings, and responding to that, I think is really relevant here in Australia. And probably, I just want to assure you that that what you're saying is great. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Liz. It's very good that you also raised the issue of family and domestic violence, because we did hear that a lot of marriage migrants and partner migrants in Australia, and there has been a spike in domestic violence involving women. And this involves also a lot of women migrants who are married to their local spouses. Annie, maybe you could briefly respond maybe to the comment made by Helen.
Thank you, Ray. I would like to respond first about the strategy that has been raised. I understand that now there is a growing support for the migrants, refugee, grassroots community to actually speak out, whether it is national, regional, or international. And we really appreciate all parties, all interfaith communities, NGO who has been believing and really finding a way for this the left behind community to be in the front line in speaking out. While we recognize that there is this growing support, but we also must remember that the presence and the voices of the grassroots migrant refugee is not really well acceptable by the government. You can see that at national level, even to the regional, international, the government, as much as possible, tried not to speak with us. They find a way how to go around and coming up with different policies that will not really engage and work with us in terms of implementation and monitoring. So it is really still a struggle. In fact, now with the COVID-19 shrinking space of the civil society organization in various regional international platform, all the more this is going to be difficult, because what we believe in IMA, migration is no longer an economic issue merely. It is really a political issue. We can see that government is heavily dependent on migrants for political purposes to subsidize their so-called economy. So, of course, they are in the intention of creating this slave-like condition among the migrant and refugee. So for us, we are not very surprised when government do not even look at us in time of COVID-19. They don't even bother of, asking the refugee, what do you need? What should we provide? They are busy giving away money to their citizen. They are giving things to their people. But again, we are not their people. So they take it for granted because of our immigration status, our skin color, our ethnicity, our type of job. They will just leave us behind. So I think the strategy that we really have to develop within this COVID-19 emergency is really how the solidarity between the migrants and other supporter, whether you are in receiving countries, transit or sending countries, whether you are interfaith NGO or other people who want to help voicing out. I think the strategy is still there. Even before COVID-19, we have been telling CWWM, be our voice in place that we cannot even speak out. Just make sure that you talk to us, ask us what do we need, and tell all those government and all those policy maker what do we need. So I think the important is not about who speak, but what are you saying. What we have been upset in the past is like some of the supporter who either interpret without asking or saying something without even consulting us. I think this is something that is more crucial in this time. So I really appeal to all of you to continue supporting us. And this is going to be very, very tough. The defender of migrant and refugee are also a threat now. In Malaysia, they've been threatened by their right-wing politician, by conservative community, even by the government. Everyone is really unsafe now, but I think the solidarity is there for us to help each other. Thank you, Ray.
Thank you, Annie. Imam Marzuki, do you have any words to share?
Mbak Eni, apa pertanyaan buat saya, Mbak Eni?
Bisa ditransfer.
Yeah, maybe Annie, you can.
Yeah.
Maybe just a brief message from Imam Marzuki.
Pertanyaannya itu tantangan strategi untuk ke depan, Pak. Bagaimana kita, walaupun ada pengakuan terhadap suara buruh migran, pengungsi ya, untuk mereka sendiri yang bersuara, tapi strategi apa yang akan dibangun untuk meyakinkan suara itu akan terdengar?
Yeah. I will respond in Indonesia, in bahasa. Any can translate my.
Mbak Rizky nanti yang nerjemahin ya.
Oh, kan nerjemahin ya. Baik. Saya kira memang ini menjadi satu hal yang penting ya kita untuk mencari strategi baru bagaimana suara-suara buruh migran ini bisa terdengar oleh bukan sekedar pengambil kebijakan menurut saya, tetapi juga oleh semua pihak yang dan apa yang tadi disampaikan oleh Mbak Eni dan Liz dan teman-teman yang lain, Pak Buitista dan seterusnya itu, menurut saya itu hal yang sangat penting untuk di underline, di garis bawahi, dan saya kira mungkin Mbak Eni jauh lebih tahu soal ini bagaimana strategi ini dilakukan, dan saya sepakat tadi apa yang disampaikan oleh Mbak Eni. Saya kira buruh migran memiliki cara yang saya kira selain pendampingan ya, juga mereka harus dikasih penguatan hak-haknya sehingga dia bisa menjadi memiliki penuh hak-haknya itu sehingga tidak ada halangan sedikit pun untuk bisa menyuarakan problem-problem dia baik di lingkungannya maupun juga di wilayah yang lebih luas. Mungkin itu yang bisa saya respon.
Terima kasih, Imam. Annie, will you be translating that, or is there simultaneous? There is. Perfect. Thank you. There are more questions that have been posted on Q&A as well as in the chat. But due to a lack, we have gone way beyond our time. It's already we're 1 hour and 48 minutes. We're 18 minutes past our 1.5 hour target. So we will still be getting all the questions, and we would like to request our panelists to look at them and respond to them. And if you could share your answers to us in text, so we can actually post it on the Facebook page of Inform, as well as on the CWWM, so that these questions, very good questions that have been raised to us, that you would be able to answer, because a lot of these questions are posed to the faith-based organizations and communities with regard to responding to the needs of migrants. Even for our end, we would like, we even have a lot of questions, and we would like to have more of this conversation in the future. I guess at this point, we would like to request some final messages from all our panelists. Maybe we could start with Levi.
Thank you very much, Ray. And I think my final message would be to respond quickly to 3 questions. Isabel Friesman from Germany, your question is very important. And in fact, there is assertion out there which I share, that COVID-19 is not in fact the great leveler, but the great revealer. That COVID-19 revealed that the conveniences and the luxuries that many of the world's people have are built on the backs of migrant workers who have been hidden from public view by public policy. So it revealed the systemic injustices. It did not level, because they're saying that COVID-19 affects the rich and the poor. Yeah, sure, the biological body indeed, but how the biological body even responds to that is much more difficult for the malnourished and the hungry compared to the ones that are already hungry, and to those that are already living with good wherewithals. Father Rex, your question, how do we say no? I'll put it this way. We say no by saying yes. What does that mean? We say no to the injustices, and we say yes to what needs to be done. And let me put it in a theological language, if you will. Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly. The requirement of justice is quite central to the biblical injunction and to the religious injunction that is shared across the religions. Love mercy, the provision of care is important, even as in the face of pandemic, we must walk humbly. We don't know much of the pandemic. We must rely on good science, even as we also know that the finitude of this earth and of the planet and its people are dependent on those life-giving work that we do. Now, Helen, lastly, on your question, there is a need to re-narrativize the whole issue of what COVID-19 has done, because in Portugal, under COVID conditions, they gave citizenship to temporary workers. The citizenship would then make it possible for temporary migrants to access the health care and the human rights protections that are given to its citizens. Minus the citizenship, there is no legal regimen, if you will, to give that protection. So it is possible. We just have to re-narrativize, reimagine what are possibilities even under conditions of COVID. Thanks.
Thank you, Levi. I always learn new words and concepts from you. Liz, maybe hear from you. Okay, while we are waiting for Liz, Imam Marzuki, final words.
Pesan terakhir, Pak Marzuki.
Baik,
Okay. I think the situation, this pandemic, the global pandemic situations of COVID-19 is very unfortunate for our migrant friends. And like I mentioned earlier in my presentation, my response is the impact of this pandemic to the migrants are have multiple effects. Is a double burden, and not only the daily life, but also this pandemic exacerbate the impact in for migrants. So I think this should be our collective attention as for our humanity, not only rely on the state, but all of us, we need to strengthen particularly their lively needs, either in their designated countries where they work, and also their origin countries. So I think this is our mandate, and we cannot deny, we cannot abandon this. And this is our call for humanity, our religious call for all of us. So I think these kind of ways, the webinars could provide inspiration to find new ways that are needed in this pandemic of COVID-19. And I think this is a really important lesson learned for all of us. So that's from us. That's from me. Thank you very much for this very good opportunity. I apologize for my language constraint. So it's very difficult for me to explore my thoughts. So I may not be contribute much. So thank you very much, and good afternoon. Good evening.
We lost Liz in the Zoom. Hopefully, we would be able to have her back. Any final words?
Thank you. So I just want to again emphasize that the COVID-19 doesn't, well, it worsened the problem, but what has been mentioned by Levy, the problem was already there. The problem of forced migration, forced labor, human trafficking, and the modern day slavery among migrants and refugee community. But the presence of COVID-19, aside of exposing, it actually multiplied. It can be double, it can be triple. So what we see now is the new trend, how the declining of migrants' rights and refugee rights in the world. Is it going to be, will it stop? I don't think so. Even after COVID-19 finish or we overcome the crisis time, government and businesses will be busy of saving their own profit. They will all the more try to impose a lot of measures to save their own sake, but also to sacrifice the life of others, the majority of us, including migrants and refugees. So I think the only way forward is really one is a building stronger unity among migrants and refugee community themselves. If you are in the funding agency, if you are a church-based or interfaith community organization, even NGO, it is important for you to facilitate how the gathering of migrant and refugee will be possible. You know that it is not only about food and income that is in crisis, even our democratic space of gathering is also in crisis. So your help in outreaching, providing what is needed by the migrants and refugee is very, very crucial at this time. In fact, in the world today, we cannot just give them advice, legal advice. This is the time that we have to raise even food, mask, sanitizer, or other items that will help them. So use that kind of giving what they need to inform them about their rights, the possibility of fighting for their rights. As what has been mentioned by Levy, there are some victories during this COVID-19, including temporary legalization for undocumented migrants. That is possible. So I think we should see the light in the end of the tunnel. We should have a hope, and we should not give up, even it is going to be the most challenging time for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annie. Thank you very much, Levy. Thank you very much, Imam Marzuki, and also Liz Stone. This has been a very wonderful conversation on our end. Hold on a second. We'd like to thank everybody who has been with us in the preparation of this webinar to the National Council of Churches in the Philippines, from the churches to the churches witnessing with migrants. In behalf of the Interfaith Network for the Rights of Migrants, as well as the Asia Pacific Mission for Migrants, we'd like to thank everybody who participated in this webinar. We have also with us Reverend Marisol Villalon, who is with us right now. Let us look forward to more webinars. I'm pretty sure there's a lot of conversations happening right now, and a lot of challenges have been posed on us with regard to building or strengthening that partnership between the faith-based communities and the migrants and refugees, especially those who have the unorganized, and even the organizations and unions of migrants and refugees wherever they are. Thank you very much once again, and we hope that you have a very good day and night for those who are already almost on their dinner time, those who are still starting levy. Thank you very much, and let's look forward to more of these, and may you have a very good day. Thank you very much again. Good night, everyone.